So today we are going to build a DatePicker completely from scratch using only SolidJS and TailwindCSS. In our DatePick component we'll have three different types. First, the single type, which allows you to choose only one date from the picker. We then have the multiple type, which allows you to select multiple dates within the same date picker. And finally, we will have the range type, which allows you to select a start and an end date on the same date picker. In addition, you can change the months by clicking on the arrows at the top, or if you prefer, you can choose a specific month from the dropdown. And we can do the same with the year. Also, the interface will be super clean, and every time a value changes, the signal will be updated with our selected dates. I hope you find this component useful, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start by installing everything by opening up a new terminal. And inside we are going to create a new SolidJS project, and it's going to be not of type JavaScript, but actually it's going to be TypeScript, so just change that here. And it's going to be on the current folder, so just press dot. Okay, so next step is to install all of the dependencies we need for Tailwind, so go ahead and do yarn add. And we are going to install them on the development side, so -d. And it's going to be Tailwind, CSS, Post, CSS, and Auto Prefixer. Okay, perfect. So now the only thing we need is to configure the Tailwind file. So go ahead and run npx Tailwind CSS init -b. Now that we have the Tailwind files, we'll go ahead and go on to the config one and just change the content here to actually cover all of our JS, JSX files so that Tailwind knows which type of files that we need to change. Finally, just go on to the source folder, and inside our global CSS file, we are going to add the Tailwind directives, like so. Let's go ahead and just clean a little bit of our project. So go ahead and delete the app module CSS. We are not going to be needing that. And inside our app, just go ahead and do a simple hello world already with the Tailwind classes so we can check that everything is working. Go ahead and delete the imports, like so. Okay, perfect. And now if we run yarn start and everything goes well, we just need to open a new local host. And there we go. We can see that we have our hello world with the class changes of Tailwind. So everything's perfect. Let's continue. Now, one thing you might notice is that whenever we change our index.tsx file, for example, let's say we had some space here and then just save it, you can see that it duplicates what it's being rendered. This is because this render method, it's never going to get disposed. So what we have to do is actually tell SolidJS, so every time there's a hot reload on the browser, we want to dispose the previous render, so then we can render the new components and not have duplicates. So in order to do that, it's actually quite simple. The render method of SolidJS returns us a dispose function. So let's go ahead and save it in a new variable. There you go. And then what we want to see is that if we are currently on a hot reload environment, then go ahead and dispose the current render function that's saved on the dispose function. So now if you refresh it and go ahead and make some change, save it, as you can see, we now disposed the previous render and rendered the new hot reload component. So the last thing we'll need is going to be a package called Tailwind merge, because we are going to do a lot of conditional classes on Tailwind. And if we don't have a proper parsing of these classes, then the results might not be what we expect it to be. And what this package does is to do all of that parsing for us. So let's go ahead and open a new terminal and simply type yarn adds Tailwind merge. Okay, so let's start by building our component. And to do that, we are going to create a new folder and just call it DatePicker for now. There you go. And inside we are going to create a new file, the index.tsx. So this is where all of our main components will be. And then just go ahead and build the skeleton. So export function, call it DatePicker. And for now, let's just return a paragraph saying DatePicker. Now in our app.tsx file, we are going to change our current components. And first we are going to do a simple wrapper. So we have everything centered and pretty. So go ahead and do a new class, and it's going to be the size of the screen, also for the height. It's going to have a background color of gray, so. And finally, it's going to be a flex div with everything centered. So item center and justify center, there you go. Now for the actual wrapper of our components, let's go ahead and create a new div. And this one, it's going to be also a flex div, but it's going to be of colon type because we are going to have multiple components. And we want to make the width full, but we are going to restrict the maximum width to something like XS, so it's more mobile friendly. Perfect, so now what we can also do is create a header and say this will be the single date picker, for example. Let's give it a little bit of styling. So first off, let's make the text white and the font is going to be semi-bold. Also, let's make the text small and give it a little bit of a margin on the bottom of 2. There you go. We can already import our components, so let's type DatePicker and import it from our folder. Okay, perfect. So now let's go ahead and do the same for the other two. And for now, let's just say this will be the multiple one and this will be the range one. Okay, perfect. Now going back into our DatePicker folder, what we can already do is create a new file and let's call it types.ts. So this file will be the one responsible for saving all of the TypeScript types for our components. So the first one we are going to create is actually the value of the DatePicker. So let's go ahead and first export it because we're going to be needing it in other files. And go ahead and type interface. And we're going to call it DatePicker value. So this will be the type responsible for the actual value that's currently selected in our DatePicker. And because we have 3 different types of DatePicker, what we can do is first for the single type is create a selected date. And it's going to be optional because we might not be on the single type DatePicker, and it's going to be of type date. Next, if we are dealing with the multiple DatePicker, we want to store the values on a multiple dates value, which will also be optional. And instead of being a date, it's going to be an array of dates with all of the selected dates. Finally, for the range type, it's going to be a start date, also optional, and an end date, again, also optional. Perfect. So now what we want to also create is another type, and it's going to be the type of the DatePicker. So DatePicker type, I can't spell today. And like I said, it's going to be either a single or multiple or a range type. Okay, perfect. So now the last type we'll need is the props that we are going to pass to our component. So let's go ahead and export interface and then DatePicker props. So first things first, it's going to have a type and it will be optional because we might not want to say which type it is, and if not, it's going to default to the single type. So this will be of DatePicker type we've just created, and then the actual value, which will be of the DatePicker value we've just created also, and a set value function that will simply have a new value, which will be again of the DatePicker type, and then just return nothing. Now we could do it like so, and we would simply pass on the signal value to our component, and then once we get the new set value, we would then have to set again the signal of our value. So what we can do instead is to optimize a little bit this, and instead of passing in the value and the new value on the parent component, what we can do is actually pass in the signal and the setter itself, and that make the component change all of the values internally. So in order to do that, instead of passing in the DatePicker type, we are actually going to pass an accessor type. So accessor with two C's, sorry. And the accessor type will have a subtype of DatePicker type. And we can actually get this from the SolidJS package. And now what we can do is do the same here for the set value, but instead of being a function and an accessor, it's going to be a setter. So again, from the SolidJS package. So perfect, now we have all of the types. Let's go ahead and go into our DatePicker component. And we can already say that we are going to get some props, which will be of the type DatePicker props we've just created. Okay, perfect. So the first thing we are going to do in our component is create all of the signals we are going to be needing. So the first one is to actually know if the DatePicker is open or not. So let's go ahead and create a is open and then set is open. And this will be a signal from SolidJS. So create signal. And for now, it's going to be false. And let's also say, for just the heck of it, that this is going to be a Boolean type. There you go. So we have type safety. Okay, so now we are going to create one signal for each of the value types we can get from the props. So the first one, it's going to be the selected date. So now set selected date. Again, create a signal. And we know it's going to be of type date. Now, what we can do is to initialize this if we get some already selected date on the props. That means that the user already has a predefined value. So what we can do is save it on the signal by doing props and then getting the value and then choosing our selected. What's wrong here? Okay, sorry, I did something wrong. So here it's not going to be the DatePicker type. It's actually going to be the DatePicker value. So sorry for that. Okay, now if we go back, we can already select the selected date. Okay, there we go. Of course, we are going to have a problem because there might not be a selected date from the props and we don't want this to be either undefined or null. So what we can do is at the top, create a new variable. Let's call it today. And this will simply be a new date object. And we'll just say that if there is no selected date from the props, then simply initialize it to today. Okay, perfect. Now let's do this same for the multiple dates. Go ahead and copy and paste it. Just say selected multiple dates like so. And it's going to be an array of dates. And again, this value will be of the multiple dates value. Now, of course, this is only a date. We are going to be needing an array. So if there are no selected multiple dates, we are just going to give it an array of today. And the last one, it's going to be for the selected range. So go ahead and change the name to selected range. Again, here. And now instead of being of type date, it's going to be an object and it will have a start, which will be of type date, and an end. So again, of type date. And to initialize this, it's again a new object. Let's give it a start, which will be from the props value, start date. Or if that doesn't exist, we just pass in the today. And let's do the same for the end. So go ahead and copy all of this. Just put end here and it's going to be the end date. There you go. Okay, perfect. So now we have all of the signals for all of the possible values. One thing we're missing is the actual value of the current view of the DatePicker. So for example, if we have selected, let's say, a day from December, but we are clicking on the arrows at the top with a different view. So we're viewing, for example, November or October or September. And of course that we still have the selected date on December, but we now have a new date, which is the current view date of the user. So what we can do is actually copy the selected dates, paste it on the top, and we can call this the view date. So set view date, and it's going to be also of type date, but instead of passing anything from the prop, it's going to be today. So we set always the predefined value of the viewing of the date picker to today's date. Okay, so now our component can be divided in three main types. So the first one, it's going to be the input, which will be the input that shows the dates selected. And then the actual modal for the picker itself can be separated in two parts. The header with the selected view dates and the arrows, and then the body with the actual dates and the highlighted dates that are currently selected. So what we can do is already go to our DatePicker folder and create a new file. And let's call it DatePicker inputs.tsx. Create another one for the body, so body.tsx. And the final one for the header. So there you go. For each one of them, export the function with the DatePicker puts. There you go. And for now, let's just return a simple div. There you go. And let's go ahead and just copy this and paste it on the header and also the body. So change on the header the name for DatePicker header, save it, and the body again, change it to body. There you go. Okay, so now we can go ahead and just create right here on the component the props interface. So export interface, then let's just say DatePicker input props. Okay, already create the props variable with the same type. There you go. And now the input itself is going to be needing a few things. So the first one is the type, also optional. So DatePicker type. And it's going to have access to the open signal. So let's go ahead and put the isOpen, which will be of type accessor boolean, and also the setter. So we can actually change the signal value inside of the input component. Next, it's going to have the values selected. So again, if it is of type single, multiple, or range, it's going to be needing all the three of them. So it can then display on the input the current selected values. Also, because we want to change the date view every time the user clicks on the input, it's going to also get a set date view with the signal from a parent component. Now for the header, let's go ahead and create the props interface. So DatePicker header props, there you go. And the first thing we need is to actually know which date the user is currently viewing, so we can present the month and the year on the top. So date view, again, of accessor type of dates. So now what we need from the header are some event triggers. For example, if we click on the next arrow or the previous arrow, so let's go ahead and create an onClick prev and onClick next. So every time the user clicks on those buttons, the parent component knows and can change the values accordingly. And we need to know if the user clicked on a drop-down item, so to select either the month or the year. So let's go ahead and do an onClick month and onClick year, returning the drop-down item that the user selected. We still don't have this type, so we can go ahead and create it by going into our types. And the type itself, it's simply going to be an ID of type number and a label for the current item. So for example, if we're talking about years, it's going to be the year in string format, or the month, the name of the month. So let's go ahead and import this. And don't forget to already create the props variable with the correspondent type. Okay, so now finally for the body, it's going to be very similar to the input one. So we can go ahead and copy this, go to the body, and at the top, just paste it, change this to body, create already the variable. So there you go. Oops, sorry. Copy this, put this here. Yeah, there you go. And the only ones we don't need is the isOpen and setIsOpen. So we can go ahead and delete it, import everything. So the accessor and the setter. And the last thing we'll need is the actual date that the user clicks on the body. So go ahead and create an onClick date that will return the date the user clicked. Okay, perfect. So now we have everything ready and we just need to finish the skeleton of our main DatePicker component. So let's go ahead and delete this. It's going to be a simple div for now. And inside, the first thing we want is our input. So let's go ahead and import this from the DatePicker inputs. There you go. We can go ahead and already pass in all of the props. So it's going to be the type, the isOpen signals, and here it's not yet selected. Sorry, it's selected dates. Also here it's selected dates and selected range. There you go. And then the set view date. There you go. Now for the other two components, we know that it's going to be a kind of a modal type. So what we can do is wrap them in a new div, and we will later do all of the classes to do so. But for now, let's just create this and import our picker header. Right, so by passing in all of our values, so go ahead and import it. There you go. And again, this is not like so, it's view date. And we are going to create the handlers, but first let's just also finish the body. So at the bottom, right here, import the body. This is going to be view date, selected date, selected dates, selected range, and then the handler, which we'll be doing so. Okay, so one thing I forgot is inside of the body, we are going to also be needing the date view, because the body has to know which dates it has to render depending on the view of the user. Okay, perfect. So now for our handlers, for now, let's just create the functions. So right here on the bottom of our signals, let's go ahead and function. And for now, let's just leave it blank. We'll do this later. So go ahead and do the same for all of the handlers. So on click year, on click next month. So every time the user clicks on the next or the previous month, there you go. And finally, when the user clicks on a specific date. Perfect. Now going back into our app, we can already change a few things over here. So the first thing we can do is already create our signal for our calendar type. So create a signal. Let's go ahead and import this. And it's going to be of the DatePicker value we created. And for now, let's just leave it as an empty object because we know that all of the values are optional, so we can do so. And now for each of our DatePickers, we can go ahead and pass in the value itself, the signal, and the setter for the signal for the value. So like so. Now, the only difference between each of the DatePickers is that the first one, we can either say that the type is going to be single or just leave it blank, which will default to single. But the other ones, we have to say explicitly that it will be of this one of the multiple type, yeah, and this one for the range. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our DatePicker input. Let's go ahead and give it a class already. And so first thing, it's going to need a cursor of type pointer. Next, it's going to have the text on white with a little bit of opacity, like 80. The text will be extra small, and the font, it's going to be semi-bold. Now let's give it a background color of a dark grayish, like so. And every time the user hovers on the input, it's going to change the background color to the same color, but with a little bit of opacity, like 70. Okay, that's fine. Then it's going to have a border, and the border will be a white border with a very low opacity, like so. Let's give it a little bit of a shadow, very small one. It's going to be rounded, medium size. The width will be a full width. There you go. And let's give it a fixed height of 9. Sorry, 9. There you go. Okay, perfect. So now all of the items inside are going to be centered. So let's go ahead and put a flex and the items center. Finally, let's just add a little bit of a padding on the x-axis. Let's give it a value of 3, and for the y-axis, a value of 1. Finally, for our hover effect, let's give it a transition on all of them because we'll be needing for a few other things. So go ahead and save it. Okay, perfect. So now what we want is to be able to change the open value every time the user clicks on the input. So if the user goes ahead and clicks this, then we want to open the modal. So let's go ahead and on the div itself, we are going to do an on-click event. And inside, let me just format this, okay. And inside what we want to do is say props.set is open. We are going to get the previous is open value and just return the negative. There you go. So now every time the user clicks on the input, it's going to open or close the modal. We can actually already see the changes if we do a little bit of a refactoring on the classes. So what we want to do is say that if the modal is open, we want to have a little white border, a thicker white border, so we know that the modal is open. Otherwise, we're just going to leave it as it is. And to do that, what we're going to do first is turn this class into an object, okay? And this will have the Tailwind merge we installed at the beginning. So go ahead and wrap all of the class inside the Tailwind merge function, like so. And now what we want is to have this default class, but we do want to have another class that it's going to have privilege on top of this one. And it is the one that says if the modal is open or not. So in order to do that, we are going to pass in a new prop onto our Tailwind merge function. And we are going to say that if the modal is open, then we also want the following classes. So first of all, let's just remove the outline in case we have one. And instead of having a border, we're going to have a ring of size 1. And the ring, it's going to be white with a little bit of opacity, like 40. Okay, perfect. So now if we click on the input, we can see that we have this kind of outline saying that, okay, we have our modal open. If you click again, we close the modal. But for now, we are just going to handle the single DatePicker type. So what we can do is, first of all, create a show component, which is the default SolidJS conditional rendering. Let's go ahead and import it. First of all, we want to show this if there is no prop type, because we know that if there is no prop type, then this will default to the single one. Or if there is a prop type and it's of value single. So what we want to show inside this div is the actual value of the selected date. So what we can do is get that value from the props. So props.dateSelected. Remember, this is the single type, so we're going to be fetching the date selected value. And because we don't want to print the date itself, we are going to print the string of the date. And we are actually going to format in a more simpler way. So to do that, we are going to call the toLocalDateString function. Okay. And inside, we are going to say that it's going to be of the English US type. And how do we want to format our date? So the days are going to be of numeric type. The months are going to be shortened, so short. And the year, we also want a numeric type. Okay, perfect. So now that takes care of the inputs. Now let's go ahead and go back into our main index.tsx. There you go. And what we can already do is update the stylings of our modal depending if it is open or not. So let's go ahead and first create a class. We can already create as an Tailwind merge object. There you go. And we are going to set first the default class. So it's going to be of type absolute. And then just flex everything as a column. Put it a little bit of a gap for now. And give it a shadow. Don't forget to actually put the parent div as a relative type, because we want this absolute div to be in regards to the parent and not the actual screen. For the model, we are going to now add a background. It's going to be a dark gray, so it's going to be rounded. It's going to have a little bit of margin at the top. So to actually see all of this already working, what we can do first is going on to the header and just type in header over here so we can have something to render to actually see the changes. And on the body, also just type in body. Okay, so now we have something to work with. So now by continuing our modal, we now have the margin. So if I delete it, you can see that it will render on top of the input, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and give it a little bit of a margin. We are going to do a little bit of a padding on the x-axis, not on the y-axis, because we are going to change that depending if it is open or not. Let's just fit the height to the items, and we are going to give it a specific width because we want the calendar to, well, fit all of the dates. And if we do that dynamically, it might not be so aesthetically pleasing. So if we do a fixed size, it will be better. And with that, we can then just deviate the modal depending on the size of the input. Let's go ahead and center everything. So item center. Let's give it a transition. Transition all. Let's upgrade the Z index to Z50 because we want it to be on top of the other components. So go ahead and click that. And now to actually center the modal, depending on the width of the input, what we can do is first say translate the x-axis by a half. So like so, translate. And we can see that it actually translated a little bit. And now the only thing missing is to say that we want to deviate the left by a half also. Perfect. So now we will always have the modal itself centered depending on the size of the input. So now the only thing that's left is to do a conditional rendering if the modal is open or not. So if it is open, the first thing we want to do is change the height of the modal itself because we want to do a little bit of an animation. And in order to do so, we are going to change the max height to the maximum value, which in this case on Tailwind is 96. Now we are going to add the padding on the y-axis. And this is why we didn't do on the main class, because when it's closed, we want to set this value to 0. So we want to do a conditional rendering on the y-axis of the padding. Finally, we want to add a border of white with a very low opacity. Give it the actual border. And we are going to translate. So translate the y-axis to be on the 0 position. And this is so because if it is open, we want it to be on the position that it's currently on. But otherwise, we want to do a little bit of an effect on going up. Again, we are also going to change the opacity. So let's go ahead and do a full opacity on the component if it is open. And we are going to change the duration of our animation to a roughly 30 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds. And the scale, it's going to be 100. Again, this is all for animation effects. Otherwise, let's go ahead and format this. What we want is, if it is closed, we want to set the max height to 0. Okay, so we can actually see this now. If we click, there, as you can see, it opened. And if we click again, it closes and it does this max height animation. So it's on 96 right now. If we click again, it's on 0. Perfect. Now we just only need to do the same for the width. For the padding, because we don't want any kind of padding when the model is closed. We're going to set the border to transparent. We don't want any border. And actually also say border none. We are going to translate on the y-axis by -6, because again, we want to put it on the top. So now if we click, you can see that not only it opens, but it comes from the top. So by closing, opening, closing, opening. We want to set the opacity to 0. We don't want to see anything of the component. So as you can see, the numbers disappeared. Open, close, and change the scale to a little bit of like a 75. So we do have this coming from behind effect. So if it is on 75, it's smaller. When it opens, it goes to a 100%. It gives this effect of coming from behind to the front of the screen. Now we just have a little bit of a problem, which is this is currently closed, but if you go right here, you can see that the mouse changes to a paragraph mouse. And if we click and inspect, we can see that we have the header and the body rendered right here. Well, but we don't want that because whatever we're going to put inside of our model, we don't want it to be in front of the other components. So in order to fix this, the only thing we need to do is say that if it is closed, we are going to do an overflow of hidden. So everything that's outside of the component, it's going to be completely hidden. So if we now check it, we can see that we don't have anything else. One thing that's actually bugging me right now, and we are going to fix that, is going into our main index, onto our app. We are just going to, on the second header, give it a margin top of 8, and on the third one, also the same. Okay, perfect. So now we have a little bit of space between the components. Okay, so next step, it's going to be the DatePicker header, like so. And let's go ahead and delete this for now. And this will be a flex type. So the header will actually center everything, and it's going to be of full width. There you go. And it's going to have, so as we've seen on the demonstration, 4 things. So the first one, it's going to be the back arrow. The second one, it's going to be the drop down for the months and the years. And then the final one, it's going to be the next month arrow. So let's go ahead and create all of the 4 elements. And now for the arrows itself, what we can do is go to this beautiful website that it's actually not mine, but I do recommend it, which is SolidJS icons. There you go, Solid icons. And here you can type whatever icon you want and just copy and paste the code of the icon. So in my case, I want the Chev left. There you go. So click on it. And then at the bottom, let's go ahead and copy the SVG. Now we can simply paste it inside our div, like so. And let's do the same for the right one. There we go. Copy this and inside our div, paste it. Perfect. So now for debugging purposes, the only thing we are going to do is go back into our main component index. And let's just set it the is open to true, so we have something to work with. Also, just that we don't have any kind of overlap, and because we are only taking care of the single DatePicker type, let's go ahead and just comment this out, the other DatePicker types. Okay, there you go. So now we have only the single DatePicker. And let's start by styling our arrows. So the first arrow, it's going to be, first of all, every time the user hovers, it's going to have a background of white with a low opacity. The actual text, it's going to be extra small, and it's going to have a fixed width of 8 and also for the height. So 8. Let's center everything. So flex items center and justify center. Okay, so we can still see anything because we need to actually change the color of our icon. So let's go and do it so with text white. There you go. Okay, and as you can see, we already have the over effect. We just need now to change a few things. So first of all, we want the cursor to be of pointer type. So every time the user overs it, you can see that we have the click button. We want it to be a full rounded, and give it a transition only on the color, so every time the user overs it, it does a little bit of a transition effect. It's also going to have a border, and it's going to be of a white color, again with a very low opacity. Okay, perfect. So now we have this icon over here, the arrow one, and what we can do is simply copy all of this class and put it on the other icon. Like so. Okay, perfect. Now, just to position everything correctly, what we can do on the first icon is actually say that we want the margin right to be auto. So this way it pushes everything to the right. And we are going to do the same for the last icon, but it's going to be on the left. So margin left, auto. To finish our icons, let's go ahead and do an on-click event. And on the case of the right icon, what we want to do is call the props.onClickNext. Let's do the same for the previous one. So props.onClickPrev. So now every time the user clicks on the arrows, it will change either to the next or the previous month. Now for the dropdowns itself, we are going to create a new component for that because it's going to be a little bit more complex. And instead of doing everything right here on this component, we'll just simply create a new one. So let's go ahead and open our DatePicker folder and create a new file and call it Dropdown. So let's export a function called Dropdown. For now, let's just return a simple div. And let's already create the prop type. So interface, Dropdown, props. There you go. Don't forget to create the variable. Now, the first thing we need is the actual items we want on the dropdown. And we can go ahead and import from the type we already created for the dropdown, which, remember, it's an ID and a label. We need to know which currently number is selected. So this number corresponds to the ID of the dropdown item. We'll be needing, again, a isOpen setter and accessor, but this time it's not going to be on the actual modal itself, but on the dropdown modal. And finally, an onClick event to know which item the user clicked on the dropdown menu. Okay, perfect. So now going back into our header, we can already import our dropdown, and we can already pass in the props. So it's going to have first the items, and for now, let's just leave it as an empty array. The current selected item, which will be the date view, right? And because this is going to be the dropdown for the months, we say that we want to get the current month of that view. We are going to have an isOpen and set isOpen. And for that, we are going to create two new signals. So the first one, it's going to be if the month dropdown is open. And the second one, it's going to be for the year dropdown. So here we are going to pass the isOpen month. And here the set isOpen month. There you go. Finally, we want the onClick, which will be triggered every time the user clicks on an item of the dropdown. And what we will receive from it is the actual item that the user clicked. So what we can do is pass in on to our onClick month from the props. Now let's do the same for the other dropdown right here. And now instead of being the get month here on the date view, it's going to be the get full year. There you go. Here it's going to be the isOpen year and the set isOpen year. Also right here, it's going to be on the onClick year. There you go. Now, before continuing our dropdown implementation, the first thing we need to do is actually get these values we want to pass into the dropdown. And for this case, it's going to be the months. In this case, it's going to be the years. And to actually create them, I suggest just creating a auxiliary function to do so. So let's go ahead and inside our DatePicker, let's create a new file and call it utils.ts. And for the months, because we always get the same number of months independently of the year we currently are, then we can do a hard-coded value. So let's create a new array. And each object is going to be of type, we can also put this here, dropdown item. So it has to, dropdown item array, there we go. So it has to have a object with an ID of type number and a label of type string. So there you go. We have our hard-coded months. And to create the years array, what we can do is actually create a function for that, because it can't be hard-coded because it depends on the date that the user is currently on, right? So if we are viewing for example, 2023 right now, then probably we would want different choices than if we were watching, for example, 1970 or something like that. So let's go ahead and create a new function and call it createYearsArray, which will receive that date, and it will create a new array of dates depending on that currently date. So it's going to return a dropdown items array. And so the first thing we want to know is the year of that date that we are getting. And for now, let's create an empty array of our dropdown items. So we want to create a range around that year, and we can do so with a for loop and say that the I value, it's going to start from the current date of the year plus a little bit of offset. And I'm going to put 10 here, but you can go ahead and put whatever offset value you find it more useful. And it's going to go backwards instead of going forwards until, again, a new offset, which in this case will be minus 30. So whichever year the user is currently on, it's going to create an array with 10 more years in advance and 30 more years in the past. Again, we are just going to push into our array the ID of the I value, and the label, we can say that it's going to be simply a I to string, because the I will be the actual date itself, the actual year itself. So we can simply put that into a string. Finally, just return our array. There you go. Now going back into our header. So the first dropdown, we know it's going to be the month, so we can go ahead and import it from our utils. There you go. And the years are going to be the function, so create years array. There you go. And we are going to simply pass in the today's date. Okay, so now that we have some values to work with, let's go again into our dropdown. And much like the model from our main component, we first are going to need let's say an input. It's not actually an input, but it's going to be the button with the current selected value. So we can go ahead and create a div for that, and the actual modal for the dropdown. So here it's where it's going to have all of the available options, and in this one it's going to be where the current selected option is. Okay, so in order to get the current value of our dropdown, we know that we have the current selected number, but we don't actually have the label. So what we can do is from the props items, let's go ahead and find an item on which the item ID is equal to our props current selected. This might return a value or an undefined, so we can go ahead and put an optional. And what we want from this item is the label, not the ID. And otherwise, if there is no item, we can simply render an empty string. So now for the classes, we can go ahead and first give it already a text white so we can see the value. There you go. We have December and 2023, which is the current date that I am currently doing this component. And because this is going to be a button-like, okay, first we can go and put the text to small and the font to bold. We can already do the hover, so every time the user hovers the button, it's going to have a white background. And instead of having a padding, what we can do is actually give it a fixed width and height, so that independently of the size of the December and 2023, so the year and the month, it has always the same button size. So for me, in my opinion, it's more pleasing, like so. Now we want it to be rounded, medium size, and a cursor pointer, so the user knows that it is clickable. And let's also just center the text. Okay, almost perfect. So we do have the over effect. The only problem now is that the text is not aligned. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and do a flex and then items center. We might as well as just do a justify center, so we want everything centered. There you go. And finally, let's just give it a transition colors. Okay, perfect. So we now have our buttons. And what we want to do every time the user clicks on the button is to simply do a props dot set is open to the previous is open value and just return the negative. So there you go. So every time the user clicks, something is wrong. Sorry, what is it? Oh, yeah, exactly. So we need to pass in as an arrow function. There you go. So every time the user now clicks on the button, it will set the is open to the inverse value. Now for the modal of the dropdown, we are going to present each of the options. So let's go ahead and create a for loop from SolidJS with the items. And what we want here is only the label. So let's go ahead and create a div and pass in the item.label. There you go. So these items are going to be conditionally rendered, the classes itself. So let's go ahead and do what we did earlier. So Tailwind merge. And for now, let's put the main class, which will have for now a text white so we can see the actual values. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, we have all of the values right now, but this is kind of bad because, well, this is not a actual modal life, so it's not absolute. So we can go ahead and do that on our wrapper element. So, and it's going to be also conditionally rendered, depending if it is open or not. So we can go ahead and do the same, Tailwind merge. And the main class, first of all, it's going to be, as we said, a absolute. Don't forget that we want this element to be relative to the parent class. So let's go, to the parent element. So let's go ahead and put the relative class over here. And now to actually give some bit of styling on the wrapper, what we want to do is, first of all, we want it to be a grid and we want to have a 4-column grid. So, okay, as you can see, it's kind of bad right now, but don't worry, we'll fix this. Let's go ahead and put it a background. Again, it's going to be a dark gray, so 950, something like that. We're going to have a fixed width of around 56, yeah, something like that. And it's going to be rounded. Rounded. Yeah. Okay, it's starting to look like something. Now we are going to put it on a top position of 10, it will be roughly the size of the button itself and a margin of 2. Give it a padding on the x-axis of 2. Now we don't want to show all of the items, so what we can do is do an overflow auto, and this will take effect later when we change the height of this component. But for now, let's just leave it there and do a transition all to do some effects. We're going to shorten the duration to roughly 200 milliseconds and just give it a gap on everything of 1, as well as set the Z index so it's in front of everything. Okay, perfect. So now what we can already do is say that if this modal is open, right, then it will have a certain class, otherwise it's going to have another one. And if it is open, the first thing we want to do is actually open the modal. So like we did on the calendar modal, the DatePicker modal, we are going to do the same. So set a max height of, in this case, 40, it's going to be less. And give it a padding on the y-axis of 2, give it a border, it's going to be white with 20 opacity. A big shadow, so we know it's on top of everything, and the opacity of 100, so it becomes visible. Finally, if it is closed, let's go ahead and set the height to 0, the padding to 0, change the border, also change the color of the border, so transparent, not border, there you go. We're going to remove the shadow, so shadow none, and set the opacity to 0. Okay, now let's finish the text itself. So first of all, let's center the text. So flex items center and justify center, like so. We can also, just for the heck of it, say text center. And we are going to put an extra small text, again with the font bold. Because these are going to be clickable, let's go ahead and put a cursor pointer. And let's just have a over effect, again with the background white with very low opacity, put it rounded, and just give it a little bit of a Y padding and the X padding. There you go. So now if we over it, we can see that it changes the background, and we know that the user can click on one of the values. Now for the conditional class, we're going to say that if the current selected item we are going to get from the props is equal to the ID of that item. Then what we want is to say that, first of all, the background is going to change for a stronger color. I'm going to put orange, but you can put whatever you want. And just so that we have the same hover, let's go ahead and put the hover as the same value as the background. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, we are currently on the December, and it does get highlighted. Now, what happens when the user clicks on this component? So what we want to do is on click, and first of all, we want to say that we want to pass in the props on click and pass the item itself. So we give it to the parent component, the item the user clicked. And every time the user clicks, not only we're going to pass in the value, we are also going to props set is open to false. So we want to close the modal every time the user clicks on one of the values. Okay, so the only thing we're missing is on the modal, we have to center it. So let's go ahead and do a minus, translate the x-axis by a half, and do a left also by a half. Okay, perfect. So now every time the user clicks on a button, you can see that it closes the modal, and when it clicks on the button, it again opens the modal. Okay, but now what I want is not only to close the dropdown every time the user clicks on a selected value, but I also want to close it every time the user clicks outside of that modal. And in order to do that, what we need to do is to do a event listener every time the user clicks outside. So let's go ahead and first create a new function. And I'm going to explain what this function does, but basically we first need to get the reference for our element, so we can also do that. Let's create a reference right here. It's going to be of a div element type because the wrapper is a div. And what we want to do is every time the user clicks outside, if first of all there is that reference, because there might not be, and if that reference does not contain the target that the user clicked, then it will be outside of that element, and therefore what we want to do is close the modal itself. Now the element of the reference, it's going to be the parent one, because we want to because we want to close the modal every time the user clicks not only outside the modal itself, but outside of the button. So now what we need finally is to add the event listener, and we can do so on every time the component is mounted by calling the onMount, which is from SolidJS. And we do add a event listener on the document, so every time there is a click, we call in the handle click outside function. Finally, so we don't have any kind of memory leaks, what we can do is every time the component is unmounted, or in this case cleaned up, we can remove the event listener. So now if we have our modal open, if we click outside, you can see that it closes independently or where it is. And because I'm really picky, we can see that if we have a large number of items, we have this scroll bar over here, but it's not really as the same type, aesthetically speaking, of the whole component. So what I want to do is to actually change this scroll bar. And in order to do that, unfortunately, I didn't find a way to do so with Tailwind. So what we have to do is on our DatePicker folder, create a new file, and let's call it styles module CSS. And inside we are going to create 3 classes for the dropdown, and we are going to set the scroll bar to the following width and the padding. And the track we're going to change for a background color of around the same color as our background on the model, and change the actual color of the thumb of the scroll bar. So now in order to inject this into our classes, we need to go to the top on our dropdown component and simply import the styles. For now, there we go. And if we go into our modal class right over here, we want now to inject this class inside the string. So we have to change this to a string literal. And at the beginning, let's go ahead and inject our styles dot Dropdown, because remember, it's the name of the class we define here. Okay, perfect. So now, as you can see, we have a much better scroll bar that fits better the styling of the whole component. Okay, so now just to wrap this up, the whole header, what we can already do is go back into our main index.tsx from the DatePicker, like so, and we can already handle all of our click month, click year, and click previous month and the next month. So let's start with the click month. We know we are going to receive a item, which will be of type dropdown item. And the only thing we want to do is to change the view date. So set view date. We're going to fetch the previous view date, like so, from the signal. And just so we don't change the actual values of the previous date, we're going to create a new view date from our previous view date. So we have a exact copy, and we know that if we change these values, we are not going to change any of the previous date values. Now, what we want to do is change the actual date to set the month to the item.id, which will have the number value of the month that is selected. Finally, just return the new view date. Perfect. For the year, we are going to do the same, but instead of setting the month, we are going to set the full year, like so. Don't forget to get the item from the function. There you go. Now for the next month, we are going to, again, do the same, but instead of setting the full year, we're going to set the month, and it's going to be for the next month. So instead of having some kind of item click, we are going to get, so new view dates, we're going to get the current month, like so, and we are going to set it for the next month, which can be done like so. Finally, for the previous one, let's go ahead and do the same, but instead of adding, we are just simply going to set to the previous month. So now if we go to our component, and if you click, for example, on the month dropdown and select, for example, May, you can see that it changes the value on the dropdown button. Also the same for the year, like for example, 2020. There you go. And if you click on the arrows, you can see that it increments the month. Let's go ahead and keep doing that. And for example, if we are in December, we can see that it passes on to January 2021. So also for the previous one. And yeah, there you go. Okay guys, so now for the body, what we need, first of all, is the weekdays. So before we get the actual days of the currently selected view month, we are going to first get the weekdays, because they are always going to be the same, right? We want to begin with the Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and so on, so forth. So what we can do is actually go to the utils, and like we did with the months, we are going to do the same, but for the weekdays. So let's just create a new constant, and it's going to be again of the type array of drop-down items. So we can go ahead and just to make sure everything is okay. And we begin with Sunday and end with Saturday. Again, the IDs are just a matter of identification on the index. So it's not really that important, but it's good that we have there. So now in the body, let's go ahead and begin doing the weekdays first. So we're going to need another div, and we might as well as create another one for the actual days of the month. But for now, let's just focus on the weekdays. And what we need is a SolidJS for loop for the weekdays we've created. And let's just import all of this. And we know it's going to be of the type dropdown item, but what we actually want is just the label. So we are going to do a mapping of the weekdays to return just the labels of each dropdown item. So now for each weekday, which as of now will be a string containing the label of the weekday, we simply return a div with a little bit of a texting style and the actual label of the weekday. There you go. Now, because I want not only the weekdays, but the actual days of the months to have a fixed width between them, instead of doing a flex on the wrappers, we are actually going to do a grid. So let's go ahead and create a new class. And let's say it's a grid. And because it's always going to be 7 days per week, we are going to say it's a grid with 7 columns. So calls 7. And we can already fit the width and the height, as well as give a gap on the y-axis of 1. So just we have a little bit of spacing between the items. Okay, perfect. Now for the actual days of the month wrapper, we are going to have the same styling. So go ahead and copy this, and on the wrapper, paste it right here. And let's go ahead and copy this for loop right inside our wrapper. And what we want now is to get an array of days depending on the current selected view date. So for example, if we are currently watching October, then we want an array with all of the days of October and the previous days from the previous month and the next days from the next month, all assigned to the correct position based on if it is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and whatever. So in order to do that, again, we're going to create a new function for that, and it's going to be on the utils. So let's go ahead on the utils, and let's create that function. Let's call it create dates array. And we know that it's going to receive the current view dates of the user, and we have to return the number of dates that we want to have rendered on the current selected month. So this can be a little bit tricky, but in a sense, what we want to do is, first of all, we want to get the current month, the previous month, and the next month of the current date. So we can do so by doing the following. So all we do here is, first of all, we create a copy for the current month, the previous month, and the next month from the date that we get from the props. And to say that this is actually the current month, what we do is we set the month for the next month by getting the month plus 1 and setting the day to the previous day of that month. So in this case, we would have the date set to the previous month on the last day. So this is not only to get the previous month or the current month or the next month, but also since we now are in the last day of each month, we can get the number of days that each month has. And you can see this now by creating a new variable. Let's call it number of days in current month. And because, again, don't forget that we set the month to the next month, but we then subtracted 1 day, as we see here. And therefore, the current month, as of now, it's on the last day our current month. So if we get the date, so the actual day of that date type, then we will get the number of days of the current month. We also need the same for the previous month. So again, get the date from the previous month. Now, what we want is to know which weekday is the first day of the current month. And don't forget that currently we have our current month on the last day of the month. So what we need to do now is say, okay, current month, let's put it on the first day by setting the date to 1. And to know the weekday, we only have to call the get day of the current month, returning a number of the current first day of the month regarding the week. Lastly, let's just create an array with our dates that we are going to return. So go ahead and we can already return the days array, like so. And we are going to fill this array in 3 main parts. So first, the number of days of the previous month, and then the number of days of the current month, and next, the number of days of the next month. Okay, so what we know is that independently on which weekday we get the first day of the month, we know that it's always going to be on the first line. So if, for example, we have the first day on Friday, then we want to get the Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Sunday days from the previous month, right? And for example, if we have the first day on Monday, then we just want one day from the previous month, which would be Sunday. So in order to do that, what we can do is first create a for loop, and that loop is going to go from the current weekday number. So in this case, let's say that the first day of the month starts in Thursday. It's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So the weekday number is going to be 4. And what we want is to start from the previous day and go backwards. And as we go backwards, we are just going to push onto the array the previous month year, the month, the number of days that are in the previous month minus that weekday. So in this case, we are going to have all of our previous month days in the beginning of our array. Now, to get the days from our current month, it's much simpler. We simply start from the 0 position until the number of days on the current month. And then again, we are going to push into our array a new date with the year of the current month, the month of the current month, and the day will be the I value until the end of the month. And now to find out the rest of the days we know that independently on the month we are currently at, it's always going to be the same number of days in total, which will be 42. Why? Because this is a grid of 7 by 6. And therefore we can do a simple calculation on which the days left that we need on the array, it's going to be the total days that we need for the full array, which in this case it's 42, minus the current length of the array. So in this way, we know how much we need to fill on our array. So now just do a last for loop, and it will go again from 0 to the number of days left in our array. And it's going to fill with new dates from the next month, year, month, and the day, which again, it's going to be the I plus 1. Okay, perfect. So going back into our body, what we can now do is instead of having the weekdays over here, we are going to call our create dates array, and we are going to pass in the current date view. So now this will get the current month that the user is viewing in our picker, and will simply generate all of the dates that we've discussed. Now this is wrong over here. Let's go ahead and call this dates, and let's just delete this. This is also wrong. And let's just do a simple wrapper for each of the days by doing a flex item center and justify center. Now for each of the days, it will have a different logic depending on which type of date picker we are currently using. So for now, we're just doing the single one. So let's go ahead and add a show element. And we want to say that we want to show this div, which we can create right now, only if there is no prop type or if the prop type is single. Let's go ahead and import this. And what do we want to render here? Well, it's the dates, but it's not the date object that we want. What we want is only the day of that date. So like so. Okay, and as you can see, the modal went bigger because the values are there, but they are not with white color, so we can fix that right now. Just go ahead and click class, text, white. Okay, and as you can see, we have all of our days in our date picker. Now we want to render different classes depending on some state. So let's go ahead and delete this and put a class again with the Tailwind merge. And the first class we want is, first of all, we want to center all of the text. So let's go ahead and again, flex items center, justify center. First of all, let's not forget to put the text white so we can see. Now we want also to center the text because we are going to change the width. Let's put it a extra small text with the font being semi-bold, like so. Let's put a cursor pointer because the user can effectively click on the items. A rounded full because again, we want to do a simple background on each of the numbers to every time the user hovers over it, It creates a circle effect on the background, so that's why it's rounded. And now for the over, just a white background with a 10 opacity. Now we are going to predefine the width with 8 and the height also. So we do have the same width as the weekdays we have over here. Perfect. Now we want to do an effect. So we're going to transition all, select none, and every time we click on the date, we want to have a push inside the effect, and we can do so by doing active and then scale the item by 90%, something like that. So now you can see that if we click on one of the dates, it gets a little bit smaller, giving the effect that it's being pushed inside the screen. Now for the next classes, we actually need to know if two dates are the same. And there are multiple ways to do this, but because we are just working with the year, month, and the day itself of the month, then we don't need to compare other things like the hours, and sometimes the date can come with some seconds of difference. So if you do a hard-coded, for example, JSON stringify equal sign to each of the dates, then sometimes it might not be the same date just because there are different seconds. But we want to compare just the year, the month, and the day of the month. So in order to do that, let's go ahead on to our utils file. And let's just create a new function called equal dates, which will receive two dates and will return a boolean in case it is equal or not. And the only thing we do is we compare the full year of each of the dates, the month, and the date. We don't compare hours, nor seconds, nor everything else. So if they do have these three values the same, then they can be considered an equal date. Okay, perfect. So now back into our body, what we want to do is, first of all, we want to render a different styling if the day is the current day that we are at. So what we can do is at the top, create a today, which again, it's only going to be a new date type, like so. And now on the class, we want to say that if they are equal dates, so today and the current rendered date, right? What we want to do is render a different class. And the only thing we want to change here is if it is today, we want to add a border. It's going to be dashed. And it's going to be of a white color with a 30 opacity. So as you can see, we are currently on the 15th of December and we get a dashed border. Now for the styling of the current selected date, what we can do is again compare the dates of not today, but actually the selected date, like so. And if they are of the same date, then we want to render the background with something like, for example, orange, and also the hover with the same color, so we don't have any kind of hover effects. Okay, perfect. So as you can see now, the 15 is the currently selected date. Okay, perfect. So now as you can see, the current selected date is today, and we have an orange background. Finally, what we want to do is actually change the styling of all of the days that are not of the current month. So for example, in this case, the 26, 7, 8, 9, and 30, we want it to be like gray, maybe like on the weekdays. So in order to do that, we are going to add a new class on our Tailwind merge. So what we are going to say is that if the month of the current date view is different from the month of the date, and the year is, or the year is also different, then that means it doesn't belong to the current month of the current date view. Therefore, we are going to simply change the text to a white with a low opacity. And there we go. Now we have our body completed. The only thing we're missing is the actual on-click event. So let's go ahead and on the date item, add an on-click. And this will simply call the props on click dates, and we'll pass in the date that was clicked, like so. So going back into our main index.tsx, we are going to finish our handle on click date. And again, we are going to have different types. So we can go ahead and say that if the props.type is of type, let's say multiple, for example, then we are going to do something else. If the props type is of type range, then we are also going to do something else. But in case there aren't any types, or it's not one of those types, then we know it's of the type single. So this is the part we are going to focus now. And it's really quite simple. So we know that we are going to get a new selected date from this function. So type date. Let's call it click date. I think it's better. Yeah. And what we simply want to do is set the selected date, right, onto the click date. Now, what happens if we try to, for example, click on 27 in this case? So because it is a date from a previous month, I think it's safe to say that we not only want to select that date, but we actually want to select the date view to the previous month. So every time we click on a date from the previous month or the next month, it shifts the month to the corresponding selected date. So what we can also do is say set view date to the click date also. Finally, we just need to change the values of our signal, because we want to let the user know that there was in fact a change on the value selected. So let's go ahead and call the props.setValue. And don't forget that this is the simple case, so we want to change the selected date to the value on the selected date. Right? So we first save it on the signal and then we pass it on to our parent component. Okay, perfect. So now if we go onto our calendar and we over the items, we can see that we have a background appearing. And if we click, we now change the selected date and it does correspond with the background color. Again, if we now click on a day before the current month, then not only it selects the date we clicked on, but it also changed the current selected month. Now, just to make sure that everything is working correctly, what we can do is create an effect right on our app TSX, and inside, let's simply do a console log of our calendar value. So let's go ahead. Let's open up the console. Okay, so now if we change the days, we can see that it changes the selected date because we are dealing with the simple date picker, and it gives us the current date that is selected. So in this case, the 5th of December. If we change it for example, the 2nd of January, you can see that it gave us 2nd January and the corresponding 24 year. Okay, perfect. So now for the multiple date picker, the only two things we need to change is the input and the body. So let's start with the body. Go ahead and open our date picker body. And what we are going to do now is get this show element and just copy and paste it down below. So the multiple one will be much the same. So let's go ahead and say multiple. We can delete this because if it doesn't have a prop type, then we don't want it to be multiple. And now everything stays the same except the orange class, because now we want to have everything that is selected orange, not only the single selected date. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and delete this. And what we are going to say is that if the dates selected from the props, if some of the dates, so represented here by D, are equal, so equal dates, and we pass in the D and the date, then we want to render the orange background. So again, if some of the dates are equal to the current date, then we want to render an orange background. Now going back into our main index.tsx, when we click on the date, we are now on the multiple type. And what we need to do is first change the signal for the selected dates. So selected dates, right? And we will get the previous selected dates. And what we want to know first is if there is already a date from that selected dates. So again, we are going to call the equal dates from our utils. And if we do find a date already inside on the selected dates, then we want to remove it, right? So let's do the inverse. We say that if there isn't any date, then what we want to return is an array with the previous values plus the new click date. Otherwise, if there is a date, then we want to return a filter from the previous values with all of the dates that are not equal to the click dates. Okay, so now for the input, what we want to do is get another show element, this time for the multiple type. Let's go ahead and delete this, like so. And instead of having this, we are going to first create a wrapper. And this is because we want to render on the input the various selected dates. So let's go ahead and do a for loop. Import this, and it's going to be from the array of the selected dates. And we simply want to return the date dot, and again, let's go ahead and copy this from here because we want the same format, like so. So now if we select various dates, you can see that we get these multiple values here, but we don't want it like this. So let's go ahead and create a new class, and it's going to be of type flex. Let's center everything. And we are going to give it an overflow. So on the x-axis of auto, so if the values end up eventually getting outside of here, we just simply cut it and put it a scroll. And let's just give it a space between each of the items of 1. Okay, perfect. Now, we don't want the values to actually break. So what we can do is here on the paragraphs, say that we want the white space, no wrap. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, we now have the values and we have the scroll because it in fact gets outside of the input. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like this scroll over here. So what we can do is the same as we did before with this scroll. So again, going back into our styles module, we can go ahead and create 3 new classes. Again, each for the date input, which will be the one we are going to put it right now. And let's give it a different class. So let's just remove the scroll itself so we don't have anything showing. By going into our input, what we now have to do is, first of all, put this as an object because we are going to put it as a string literal, like so. At the top, let's import the styles and inject in the string literal, like so. The styles dot, and what's it called? The date inputs. There you go, like so. Okay, perfect. So now we don't have any scroll bar, but if you see, we can actually scroll the inputs itself. Lastly, what I want is to actually put a dot between each of the selected dates so we can have a clear distinction between the selected dates. And in order to do that, what we can do is, first of all, just surround this again, like so. And it's going to be a string literal, all of this. And we are going to inject, first of all, the value we had previously, like so. And then just say that we want either if the index is greater than 1, then we are going to add a dot. Otherwise, we don't add anything. So now, as you can see, we do have a dot between the selected dates. Perfect. So now if we try to select a currently selected date, we can see that it disappears, like so, by having none. And by clicking, we actually get selected right here. So perfect. This one's done too. Okay, so now for the range type, we are going to do the same as we did on the multiple one. So let's go ahead and start with the body. And we can go ahead and simply copy the multiple one, the show element, and paste it on the bottom. Like so, change this to range. So first thing we want to say is that instead of having the date selected or a specific date selected, we want to render an orange background if the start date, so if on the range selected, the start date is equal to the current date, and if the same is true for the end date. So if the current date is equal to the end date on the range selected, then we want to render both of them with the orange background. Now, what we want to do is to render the background of each of the days that are between the start and the end date selected. So in order to do that, what we can do is inside, first of all, let's just delete the date for now. So if we save this, we can see that we have nothing. But instead, we are going to add another show. And what this is going to do is show an orange background with a little bit of opacity. So this will be the one responsible for rendering the background if the range selected. So first of all, if we do have a start and end on the selected, because if we don't have both of them, then we don't have a range to actually render the background between the dates. And we are going to say that if the date is between that start and end, then we are going to render this low opacity orange background. But in order to do that, we first need to create this between dates. So let's go ahead and go to our utils. And let's just go ahead and create between dates, which will be simply, well, almost the same as the equal ones, because we're going to have a start and an end and a date to compare these two. And we simply say that we want the year, month, and date of the start to be less than or equal, except for the day. We don't want the same day, right? It makes sense. And the end date to be greater or equal, except again, the date itself. So now by importing this, let's go ahead and import this. And just so we can see what we are doing, we can actually change our main calendar values on the app.tsx. And let's just say that we have, for now, a today date. So new date. Actually, let's call this already starts. And let's create a new for ends. And let's say that we want the start to, let's do a set date of the start.getDate. Let's say we want the start to begin at the previous 3 dates. Yeah, there you go. And for the end, let's do the same, but for the next 2 days. So this is going to be the end, like so. And then we just simply go here onto our signal and say start date. It's going to be equal to our start. And the end date, it's going to be equal to the end. Okay, perfect. So now, as you can see, we clearly have the background. The only problem now is that, well, it's like so. It doesn't make much sense, right? So this is because we are saying that the background is of an absolute, and then we say that the width and the height is of full. But remember that the next relative parent is probably, if we go and scroll up a little bit, well, it's not actually the body, but it will be the whole DatePicker itself. And we don't want that. We want this absolute to be relative to each of the dates. So in order to do that, let's go here onto the main class and let's just say relative. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, we now have our selected dates, like so. And we have a background from the dates of the start and the end. So let's just add one more to the end dates so we can see better. Okay, there you go. Okay, so now we can go ahead and do the same for the current selected dates. So go ahead and copy and paste this. And instead of being between dates, what we actually want is to say that if we do have a start and an end, and these are equal, so if the start is equal to the current selected date, and the start is different from the end date, because again, we might have the start and the end date on the same day. And if so, we don't want to render this, but if this happens, then we want to render the background. So go ahead and save it. And now copy and paste. There is same thing, but for the end in this case. So like so. Okay, perfect. Now let's just render the date itself. So by doing a little paragraph, and there you go. We have the dates and we have the background. But as you can see, we still have a few problems. Like for example, the selected dates, it has the rectangle and we don't want that. So one thing we can do is actually round these backgrounds, but I want to have different effects, and I want to actually have a gradient from the orange to a transparent background. So in order to do so, we simply change the classes of this background and this background over here. And again, we are going to add a rounded, but in this case, the left one. In this case, it's going to be the right one. And we are going to have a gradient from the orange to a transparent background. Again, this one from the left, this one from the right. Okay, perfect. Now we just need to fix the today offset, as we can see here. And this is happening because if you see here, the current day, it has a border, so it's a dashed border. But unfortunately, the border always leaves a little bit of space between the elements, and we don't want that. So instead of having a border, what we can do is have a ring instead. Like so. Okay, so the only thing missing is to handle on the click date for the range type. But first of all, I made a mistake. So what we need to do here on the selected range is put the start and the end as an undefined, because again, we might not have a start or an end select. So we need to update the picker also. So here it's going to be a optional. Let's go ahead. Put this like so. Go. And also for the body, it's going to be the same. So the start and the ends can be optional. So the first thing we can say is that there is no start date selected, and for that we're going to do the statement for that. So if there is no start on the selected range, then what we want to do is update our selected range with the new click date on the start, and the end will have nothing. And yet just simply set the new values that are stored on the selected range to the parent prop and simply return. Now the next case we can find is if the selected range, let me just update this, has a start, but doesn't have an end, and the starts and the click dates are different. So again, because if they are the same, then we don't want to set the end date to the same date as the start date. So they have to be different. So if this happens, what we can say is if the click date's get time is less than the selected range starts, so we get the times both from the start and the click date. And if the click date is before the start, right, then what we want to do is set the selected range, the previous value on end now. So we want to put the start on the end and the click date on the start, because again, if we have, for example, the 12th selected, and then we select a previous value like 6, that we don't want to have the start on the 12th and the end on the 6th, right? We want to have the start on the 6th and the end on the 12th. So we basically switch. Otherwise, we simply set the selected value to be the start where it was. So we get the start from the previous selected value. And now the new click date will be on the end position. And again, like the one above, we are simply going to update the values on the parent and return it. The last case we can get is the user clicks on the date and there's already a start and a end selected. So in this case, what we want to do is set the range selected, the start to the click date. So again, because we already have, because we already have something selected, then we simply want to define the start and start the whole process again. Again, don't forget, update the parent, like so. Okay, perfect. So now if we click on a date, you can see that it deselected the start and the end because we already have both and we ended up on this situation. And if we click now, for example, on another one, let's say the 20, we can see that put the end dates on the 20 and all of the in-between dates will get orange with the opacity background. Again, if we click on another one, it disappears the two and then the end date and like so. Perfect. Okay, so now for the input, it's really simple. It's going to be more or less the same as the multiple one, but instead what we're going to do is show the value. If we have a start value on the range selected, then again, we are going to show the start with the correct format. And if we have the end, we are going to also show the right format, but we are going to add simply a minus in between. So we know that there's a start date, minus, and then the end date to show that these are two dates in between. So as we can see, now we have December the 5th with the dash or a minus in this case to the 30th day of December. Okay, so there's just one thing missing and we have our component completed, which is we currently have to click on the input to close and open, but I don't want that. I want to not only be able to open and close by clicking on the input, but also by clicking outside. So as we did on the dropdown, we are going to do the same here for our main modal. So in order to do that, let's go on to our main index.tsx and at the top, right about here, something like this. So after the signals, we want to put the same as we did on the dropdown. So go ahead and put the on mounts and on cleanup effect and simply add an event listener or remove it with the function name. In this case, it's going to be this one. We need the reference of the wrapper. So let's go ahead and at the top, let's add that reference and don't forget to actually reference the element. So by going down here at the main element, this one, you can type ref and then just pass in the wrapper ref. There you go. Let's just go ahead and on our app, delete this. Let's go ahead and delete this also. Uncomment all of our pickers. Let's go back into our main index and change our is open to false. We don't need to be open at start. There you go. Okay, perfect. So now we have our three different date types. So on the single one, if we click on a date, it selects the date. If you have the multiple, we can select multiple dates or deselect them like so. If we have the range type, we can select a different range like so. So everything seems okay. The month, we can change the month of the view and then select another date. Yes, perfect. There you go. We have June now. The year also works, right? So 2016. Let's scroll a little bit here. Okay, perfect. That works fine. The arrows work fine. And we now have a fully working date picker with different types. Okay guys, perfect. So I hope you find this component useful. I know I find it myself because there are a lot of times and use cases that I really do need to pick a range or select a date to filter some kind of date or something like that. And unfortunately on not only on SolidJS but on a lot of other frameworks like React and something like that, we don't have the kind of date pickers that we usually want. We want something specific, and I just wanted to give you guys an approach and a way to do that for yourselves, right? So you don't have to depend on external libraries, and if you want to change something, you then already know how to do it. So I hope you guys like it. If you want to download the code, I'll leave a link on the description down below, or you can go to my website and download it from here. Until the next one, cheers.